Some people have wanted to know how we got to where we are and how it started. So a little bit about that is that it was in the 70s, and I was and joined a real estate and investment firm in San Francisco. And at that firm, it was quite unusual at the time, I felt like I was in a 24-hour personal growth workshop. It's like we were using the term and win-win business before it was popular. It was all about being 100% responsible for our results. It was a focus on relationships, internal and external. It was about our attitudes as we walked in the door and the results. So not only were our lives changed, but everybody we worked with changed. We were creating whole communities of people that were now interacting with each other. We were also renovating Victorians in San Francisco, and you could see us like moving across the city of San Francisco, renovating Victorians. It felt like a high time, just a really high time. A lot of energy, interaction that was going on, so we got written up in national magazines. And then all of a sudden, hundreds of people wanted to come work there, and it wasn't really for the work that we were doing as much as we were changing lives of what was going. So I started and left with one of the partners. It was Marshall Thurber, and we left and started a business school for entrepreneurs. And I know Wilson is just outside the door there, but he is continuing with the business school now. It's interesting in China and where it's going. But at the business school, we brought in instructors in different business topics, and the real change happened for me, and I always look, why am I doing what I'm doing now, or what was the cause? Because at that time, I learned of two people that became my mentors, and they're legendary global thought leaders. One is Dr. Georgi Lozanov. I know if you've taken quantum learning, you've heard it and some of the story. And Buckminster Fuller, who is so important to me. But Dr. Lozanov, he was, his work at that time in Bulgaria, he called it suggestology, and it means everything makes a suggestion. Kind of everything speaks, everything's on purpose. There's so many things, and I go right back to the source. Actually, behind this wall in our storeroom, I still have his original research, about that much. So when he came, he was in my home for 3 weeks and learning his methods that we know as accelerated learning at that time. And it was a moment that changed everything in my life in the direction. I always go back to that moment in time of what we've created and what we're doing out there in the world. You know, what would have happened if that didn't happen? And I didn't know it at the time, you know? It's like, I wish I could go back there and maybe would have paid a little more attention, you know, of what was going on. But it was 1979, and he was in my home, and I think about the importance of setting up an environment. When I set up my first accelerated learning environment, it was for Dr. Lozanov himself. So it was like, every time you do anything, it's like, oh, what else can I do? What else can I do? Set, you know, the environment, the plants, the arrangement, the ambiance, and then it's like, what else could I do, you know, to do that? There was a lot of intrigue in bringing him there at that time because it was behind the, you know, closed country. And he came with a bodyguard, and it wasn't so much to protect him as that they wanted to make sure he went back to his country. They made sure his family didn't come with him. They wanted to make sure he went back home and was a national treasure for him. So we took his methods and we applied them to the business school. And it was so much aliveness and engagement, and adults saying, I never learned like this before, and so excited about how they were learning. So at that time, United Nations, UNESCO, invited him to write, and they studied his research, and there's a big report on that. It was a technology worth duplicating and superior teaching method at that time. So what is really meaningful for me is keeping in touch with him. And then in 2010, UNESCO came to him for an updated report, and it was in Education for All. So you can look it up, it's printed there. And Dr. Lozanov contacted me to write the story of our 30 years and how we applied his methods, and he considered that part of his legacy. So I feel really honored with that connection for him, and that Dr. Lozanov, there's so much different meaning and in things that are embedded into quantum learning all the way through that you could just see, and it goes back to those moments of what he felt was, so important. So also at the first business school, we invited, and he showed up, was Buckminster Fuller. How many of you know of Buckminster Fuller? Yeah. Invented the geodesic dome and considered the Leonardo da Vinci of our time, which were in the Da Vinci room, we named it. But he came to the first business school, and so many of his teachings we consider foundational to all of our programs. One is just I think about his sense of commitment, because he's somebody that devoted his life to make the world work for all of humanity, 100% of humanity, and there's a whole quote about that. And what does it mean to be 100% committed? I mean, I spent a lot of time over 7 years with him. I got to drive him around and talk with him and be with him, and we put on a program that was a week long, and he said everything he wanted the world to know. And we have the recordings of that and such. So I feel so blessed to be able to spend time with those people and be with them and gain things from them. But the thing about Bucky, as he's known, is his curiosity. Every time he looked at anything, he wants everybody to do their own experiential evidence. It's like, don't take your word for something. It's like he was curious and asked questions about everything that was out there. He also is quoted as saying, environment is stronger than will. And from that he said, I would never presume, I don't know if I'll get all the words right, presume to change people. That's much too difficult. What I do is create these environments, and people change in preferred directions. Now think about that. The importance of environment, and when we have students, we create it's like telling somebody, be more motivated. No, you create the environment and the experiences, and they become more motivated, and that's what you do. So I was invited to, there's a book out there, A Fuller View, that was written. I was invited and wrote a chapter, pages on environment is stronger than will. Also, Sherry Clark is a student of him and wrote her dissertation on synergetics and has a chapter in the book as well. But all these rooms in this building we've named, and that's the Bucky Fuller Library down the hall. So those are all really, really important. So I want to just show you, this is Dr. Lozanoff. You imagine, he was in my house for 3 weeks with me at different times, and just, one thing I'm going to say from him is that he creates this ambiance and experience, and I'll never forget a time when I don't feel like I was getting the information, and all of a sudden he threw me this big beach ball and the answer came out. I don't know why, it's one of those things I always remember from him. But there's Dr. Lozanoff, and there's Buckminster Fuller with myself and Marshall Thurber. You can tell how long ago it was. But when I think about the importance of environment, Lozanoff was all about the environment, saying everything makes a suggestion. If you think it doesn't matter, it does. You see a piece of paper, the way the chairs are aligned, the way you're greeting at the door. If you think it doesn't matter, it does. Everything is going into our paraconscious, as he was talking about it. And then we have Buckminster Fuller, who says the environment's stronger than will. And I think about all those things and how important that is in our culture of what we do. So from the business school, the adults were saying, I don't remember learning being this much fun and engaging, and people were getting it at a different level. I always remember we had a CPA and went through the business school, and he came out of it saying, I never got accounting like this. It's like, because it was an experience, it's like it became part of him, it became him, versus what I did. It becomes you type of thing. So out of that, with the adults saying we're having so much fun that we have to do something for our kids. So it was 1982, we did our very first super camp. And it was because of that first super camp that committed on my part to continue with youth. And then from the youth, we're just exuberant. You know, when I was talking before, just about that passion when you see a student change and you want to commit. It was at that first super camp that the students were very exuberant. There was one boy who was much smaller in size than the others and very quiet. And you know, as one of those students, you say, are they getting anything? You know, is anything going in there when they're so quiet and they don't say anything? And then on the very last day, students were coming up and sharing what they got, you know, our super camp graduation closing, and they were all coming up, and then we saw the boy raise his hand, and it was like, oh my God, first time raised his hand. So he came up in front, and he started to talk, and all the students that were in the room just stood up, stopped their feet, clapped, and he was standing there stunned. And his eyes were big, and his shoulders were down, and I looked at him and I said, this boy will never be the same. You know, he was so acknowledged in a way. I saw he was almost like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And I feel like that's when I made the commitment that I would continue with Super Camp. We're in our 38th year. And that's where I made the commitment to continue and do the work. When we moved into this building, it was the 25th year. And we had a celebration and we invited people to come. And because of the internet, I searched him and found him. And he's a grown man now, and contacted him, and he came and actually brought his father and his brother. And there were people in the room, and he was sitting here, and I got to have him stand up and acknowledge that where we are in the world now and all the work and outreach we do, and it was your courage where I really sat there and looked at you, and it's like that's making a commitment for my life. So it's been going on a long time. So with Super Camp, when it was in its, I think it was the 8th year of Super Camp, we were starting to hear back from teachers and principals because they would connect with kids and say, in the fall, what happened to you? You're so changed. And they would tell them about Super Camp. And so our first program was that we did, a quantum learning school program without the name quantum learning back then. It was the first one, was in Rabun Gap, Georgia. And I always remember it so well because here they had 50 teachers for 3 days and we were training, and then we got the 200 students, and it was kind of like our test program, and CNN got wind of it and covered it. So CNN covered our very first test program. So we have it on national television. But just so we've grown from that point. And I always think about what happens. You know, it's like one thing to another to the another. It's like what happened if we hadn't gotten a national article at that business company that got us to the business school, that got us to Dr. Lozanoff and Bucky Fuller, and then doing youth programs, and then them going into the schools. And all that just kind of loops into where we are. So I have a video that I want to play. It's just 2 minutes, but just it shows some of the past and where we've been.
In the 1970s, Learning Forum founder and president Bobbi deporter hosted Bulgarian Dr. Georgi Lozana as he first unveiled groundbreaking research on brain function and memory to the West. By setting up a learning laboratory for Dr. Lozana, quantum learning methodologies were established and an accelerated educational summer program was born.
This is Super Camp, a worldwide student success program that the Wall Street Journal says turns so-so students into academic achievers, and USA Today says changes kids' lives. They've had major media attention since they began in 1982.
Reading and writing instead of arts and crafts at a summer camp in California.
This is no ordinary summer camp. This is Super Camp.
Super Camp.
Super Camp.
Super Camp.
Revolutionary new ways of learning are being developed and taught.
And because of that, schools are bringing Super Camp techniques into the classroom.
They learn how to learn. 80% of the Super Campers did not want to come here.
I was like please don't send me here. But now that I got here, I really like it.
Youngsters face seemingly insurmountable problems like walking a high wire. Then they're shown they can succeed. Founder Bobbi Deporter says 2/3 of her graduates improved their grades.
Yeah, I learned that everything is possible, that you can just go for it.
College entrance scores jump an average of 200 points.
I have a lot more confidence, self-esteem.
12 hours a day of how to learn math, how to learn writing, how to gain confidence.
If you really set your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. It made me feel like I was really somebody.
So learning how to learn is what we feel is really important, and with information increasing at the rate it is, that's the most important skill that they can learn.
Set your limits to the sky and you can make it to the sky.
I love that. Set your limits to the sky and make it to the sky. That's Gerald Wolfe. He's an attorney in Los Angeles now. It's fun where it leads to. So where we are now, I mean, I look at all the basis of where we've gone, and it's like, it feels like the got it factor, or people connecting in some way, or, you know, recognizing something in your gut, like, this is what I want, this is making a difference, I want to connect with it. How do we create these cultures? How do we get the students, how do we take it out there bigger in the world? You know, we've been in over 20 countries. I haven't counted all the countries we've actually produced programs in. This year we're in 14 countries. You know, when we think about it, that we have a super camp, over 80,000 graduates that have attended the program, and now we're in second generation. Every single in the US, every super camp closing ceremony, I ask, you know, how many of you parents in the room have been to super camp? And there's always hands that go up. So it's second generation that we've been in that's reaching out. We've been in thousands of schools and districts. At one point we were estimating over 100,000 teachers have received training. And you know what that translates to students? It translates to millions of students out there. And a lot of it is with what we teach and do. The 8 keys of excellence have gone out in different ways. So that's where we are now, and it's like still looking at where we are now and where do we, I really would love a critical mass. How do we create a critical mass of joyous learning out there? So what I'm about is, it's about engaged learning, it's about joyous learning, it's about meaningful learning. Because that's what quantum learning is about, and that's why you're here and what we want to create more of in the world. So that is quantum learning. You know, it's all about the orchestration with everything that we're doing. It's like, look at those words. On one hand, it's words, and the other is we know how it gets reflected in the meaning of what we're doing and the work that's out there. So one of the words is excellence that's up there, and foundational to all of our programs is what? Is the 8 keys of excellence. Is anybody not familiar? I know we have a few new people in the room know the 8 keys of excellence. So the 8 keys, think about, it is about excellence. And a story that I just love, there's a man who was head of Hearst newspapers. His name was Bob Danwig. I don't know if any of you know of him. But he's somebody that when he grew up in 5 foster homes and had a very challenging time. A lot of story behind that. And then he had an opportunity when he was in his late teens to work at a newspaper. And he talked about a mentor that he had at the newspaper. It was a salesperson. And he said it changed his life. He said this salesperson harbored a dedication to excellence. He dressed with excellence. He carried himself with excellence. He interacted with his clients with excellence. He helped me tune into excellence. And then this young man turned out to be head of all Hearst newspapers. I read his book, it was quite a few years ago, and then I was looking him up on the internet and found he just passed away in August. But there's so much written about him and what he did and who he came from. So I also think about the difference between success and excellence, because success is wonderful. We all want success, and it is usually attached to a goal or an achievement. When we think about excellence, it's ongoing, and it's who you are in that place. So also with excellence, when we bring up excellence, some people will bring up perfection. And there's a quote from Michael J. Fox I like. He says, "I'm very careful not to confuse excellence with perfection." He said, excellence I can reach for. Perfection is God's business. And so looking to see who we are and where we come from. One of the definitions that I really attune to for excellence is good qualities and a high degree. I always think about those good qualities and how they become you and what they are. When I was telling my story earlier, one thing that I left out of my story, just to share with you, it was at the time when I was doing the business school, and we brought in an instructor. We brought in many instructors. One of the instructors, a man who wrote business cases for Harvard, and he was coming in to teach different business subjects there. And he had a way of making, he shared a system to make money in the stock options. And I think about it because, you know, we were there at the business school with all this good work we were doing and the exuberance and changing lives and all of our values and all that's there. And we thought, So we followed it for about 6 months, and it was like, well, it was working. And we thought, wow, is this a gift? You know, all this money that we can use to support all the good work we're doing in the world. Which felt, now when I look back at it, as a justification, but just, you know, it's like, where were we at with it? And so we invested money and we brought other people's money in, and it still always felt like it was working. It was working good, and we take it and put it all into this good work we're doing. But there was a moment that we grew so big that we broke our own system. And here I went from making a lot in the real estate and had a lot of assets, and we were on a high doing all this good work in the world. And it was within a 3-week period, I lost everything. So I lost all my properties. I lost my home. It got down to where I lost personal possessions were sold off. And I got in this place of, well, it'll be okay if I could just keep the piano, or I'll be okay if I could just keep this. And it was devastating, really, and just feeling that sense of loss. And so I spent some time just healing myself, because I felt like everybody was upset with me and angry with me, and it was just this time of loss and loss. So I spent time with myself, and you know what came to realize? It's like, oh, they can take the piano, they can take the house, they can take this, they can take all these things that they have, but they couldn't take who I was. And I got that at such a deep level. Intellectually you can think about it, but to get it at such a deep level that nobody can take my values from me. Nobody can take, my attitude from me, or nobody can take who I am at my core. Nobody can take my dreams. If I had the skills to create a dream, nobody can take that away from me. It's impossible. But to have that emotional response keep going through of things leaving, and really got who I was. Because you get busy out in the world. Who am I? And it was like who I was. So I think about our definition as well as good qualities in a high degree that become you. And they're yours. You keep those. They define you. They are who you are, all your goodness of who you are. So think about what it is that you value and what are your good qualities. So for me, we have, I think about the core inside. So if all these colored papers represented different values and good qualities I have, it's like taking it inside. This is inside me. This is my core, the core of who I am. And sometimes talking to students will say, scientists take samples, core samples to find out of elements, to find out what's in them. If I took a sample of your core, what would I find? What's in your core?